My name is Violeta Gonzalez. I work for CIFOR, and I'd like to welcome you to today's closing plenary session. It is my pleasure to first introduce Tony Lavinia, former facilitator of Red Plus negotiations for the UNFCCC. Many of you know Tony. You know that he has been a very important source of information for Forest Day, and that he has been updating us every year on the state of Red Plus negotiations in the UNFCCC and the inner workings of the UNFCCC. Today we welcome him to give a recap of the role that forests have played in the UNFCCC negotiations and to hear his views on how Forest Days at the COP have contributed to informing the negotiations to date. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Violeta. My thanks to the Collaborative Partnership on Forests and to CIFOR for inviting me again to speak before you. I have been doing, as Violeta said, an update of this negotiation since Forest Day in Copenhagen when I was chairing the Red Plus negotiations. So as this is the last Forest Day during the COP, I admit I will miss this. Actually, not the speaking part. Believe it or not, I'm actually a shy person. Seriously, it is always challenging to sum up in 5 minutes or so everything that happened in a year of negotiations and what to expect in the next 7 days as parties buckle down to make decisions. I also had to be sure I do not violate confidences and the unwritten rules among negotiators about attribution when I make these updates. Aside from being shy, I am a don't tell guy. The integrity of the process requires confidentiality. At the same time, through the years that I facilitated Red Plus, I strongly believe in transparency and always brief stakeholders way back in the Copenhagen process. And I'm glad that the current chairs of both SUBSTA and the LCA Red process have done the same. So I will not miss Forest Day because this chance to talk to you is no longer going to happen. I will miss Forest Day because it has had a profound influence and impact on the negotiations throughout the years. I think when you look at the themes of all the Forest Day, what it intended to do in those themes actually happened in the negotiations as well. Aside from a wonderful, really wonderful place to explore new ideas and new issues, including new approaches to long-standing issues, Forest Day has also been a safe space and good venue to have conversations about serious issues we have not yet resolved in the negotiations. Just today, I attended a session moderated by Tony Simmons on drivers, and I was really fascinated by that discussion. That's a discussion that has not yet happened in the UNFCCC in an extended way. We were not again able to do it this year. We'll have to do it in the next SUBSTA. I also attended the Red Plus Finance discussion session just ended, and it also gave me new ideas on how to deal with Red Plus Finance and how to scale up Red Plus Finance. But aside from this source of ideas, Forest Days has also been a good place and a good venue to actually explore solutions to things happening in the negotiations. And let me just tell you 3 stories of past negotiations where, when I was chairing the LCA negotiations, where I found solutions or helped parties were able to find solutions during the Forest Day, when we were dealing with these issues. So it was in Forest Day in Copenhagen where I had a conversation with a colleague in a negotiation that led to a breakthrough to solving how a reference to free and prior informed consent was going to be included in the Red Plus decision. I had struggled for months in doing that, and it was a very difficult issue because while most countries had voted for the adoption of the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, the UN DRIP in the United Nations, a few countries did not and were hesitant about having a reference in the Red Plus decision. And it took a lot of negotiations back and forth. We did a lot of negotiations and we could not solve the problem. Until one day in a conversation in Copenhagen during Forest Day, I finally was able to get an idea from another colleague in the negotiation to solve that problem. And true enough, the next day on Monday when I proposed the solution, which is a reference to the noting of free and prior informed consent to the UN DRIP, the colleagues in the negotiations accepted that solution. It was also during Forest Day in Cancun where the idea of a safeguard information system was first discussed. If those of you who were there would recall, there was a whole debate on how do you actually, how do you actually implement safeguards at the international level? What's the role at the international level for implementation of safeguards? And we were actually at a stalemate after the first week until someone, a few others actually in a conversation during Forest Day was able to devise a solution and found the idea of safeguard information system as the way forward for that. And true enough, in the next week when that was raised, although not formally, because if you remember in Cancun, we were not able to really have a formal discussion of the Red Plus discussions, but it was raised among the concerned parties, it was accepted as a solution. And last year in Durban, where the big issue in LCA Red Finance was markets and how to deal with it, I will now admit that I was able to test the solution in conversations here with colleagues on how to deal with markets and was able to find that solution as we went into the second week of negotiation in Durban. So I'm sure that today, as many negotiators are also here today, some of you have been discussing what to do with the roadblocks to agreement that we have encountered in SABSTA and likely to encounter in the LCA negotiations. This brings me to the update to the negotiations, which I will do for the last time, maybe, at least in Forest Day. It is not a secret that the SABSTA negotiations and forest monitoring systems and MRV did not result in an agreement. Take note that this is the first time actually in the whole process that a Red Plus group, whether in SABTA or LCA, has not reached a conclusion on something very important. Of course, the conference is not over and we still have a second week of negotiations, and parties could always bring it up again at the COP level. But there is no certainty that this will be resolved. Essentially, parties could not agree on how to address international verification of emissions reductions and have decided to continue this work next year. The same possibility of stalemates exists for the LCA because there are serious issues that have to be dealt with there as well. But the problem, of course, with LCA is there's no LCA next year, or it looks like there will be no LCA next year. Who do we turn over the work? At least for the MRV work, it can be turned over back to SABSTA, but for the LCA work, there's no place to turn it over. There's always the possibility, of course, that the COP president will take on the SABSTA issue and bring it to the ministers, or if there are LCA issues that could be bring to the ministers. But I'm not sure if this will necessarily make a difference. We need to ask whether there's a willingness now to compromise on this key fundamental issue as emissions verification or red finance issues that have to be dealt with. And here is the truth, I think. The truth is that the honeymoon is over for Red Plus. We are down now to the nuts and bolts of the mechanism, to things that matter most in the ground. Verification, how payments are to be made as being discussed in the Red Plus, the LCA discussions, the inclusion of non-carbon benefits, the implementation of safeguards, the establishment of institutional arrangements like a Red Committee or some other system to provide a platform for continued discussion of Red Plus concerns. In most ways, especially if we actually nail down RMMRV, which I actually thought we would be able to do here in Durban, hopefully we can still do next week, the international policy framework on Red Plus is complete, and we should no longer expect signals from the UNFCCC except the ones we already have. I mean, maybe it's not realistic to think that we can push the process even further and get more from what we've already done over the last 5 years. My own reflection on this is that as potentially good a mechanism I think Red Plus could be and is, it is essentially limited by its emphasis on forests. In that sense, Red Plus, from both a climate and development point of view, is limited by its own vision, and even as we implement it now, and we need to implement it in the pre-2020 period, we must think beyond Red Plus in the UNFCCC and move on to the obvious thing. And without actually knowing the theme or studying the theme of this Forest Day and Agriculture Day, for me, it's quite obvious that a landscape approach which combines forest, agriculture, and other land uses with a holistic approach and common rules is the way forward. And in this sense, the ADP discussions and negotiations provide an opportunity to correct the things that might have to be corrected in the next years to come, provide an opportunity for the post-2020 world. Right now, for example, I've been following, and don't ask me how I do it, I do it electronically. I do it with other colleagues. I'm following 6 negotiations: LULUCF, SAVSTA, RED, LCA RED, Agriculture and Adaptation, and of course the ADP. And it's crazy when you're doing that and looking at it from a land use point of view, because it does sectoralize things and you come out with solutions that are not really going to be as effective on the ground as if you had an integrated approach. But an integrated approach, a landscape approach, brings its own challenges, of course, as we have seen during the day. This might be the last Forest Day during COP, but I'm sure we will do something equally useful, maybe even better, because the vacuum created will demand no less. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much, Tony, for walking us through that evolution and also for taking the time again, and perhaps for the last time at the COP, to update us on the negotiations. This morning, CIFOR's Director General Peter Holmgren announced on behalf of the Collaborative Partnerships on Forests that today will be the last Forest Day to be held in the sidelines of the UNFCCC COP. Under the leadership of CIFOR's former Director General Francis Seymour, the first Forest Day was launched at the COP13 in Bali in 2007. Forest Day quickly became one of the most influential global events on forests. Now, 6 years later, we would like to invite you to watch a commemorative video of our journey to bring forests on top of the political climate change agenda. A journey which began in Bali and continued through Poznan, Copenhagen, Cancun, Durban, bringing us today for one last Forest Day at the COP18 in Doha.
If you didn't come to Forest Day, you missed the COP.
Forest Day represents a unique gathering of people from a whole spectrum of groups involved in forest conservation around the world.
If deforestation continues at the current level, there is simply no way we are going to reach our target of keeping the increase in global mean temperature under 2 degrees.
Forests can, indeed they must, play a major role in solving our climate problem. And we all have to act quickly.
I think Forest Day is probably the most important communication effort on forests that we have had in the past years. And it has really helped the UNFCCC to focus on forests and be informed about forests.
It's really nice.
You enjoy the Forest Day?
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
It was great.
Great.
Really,
Okay.
really nice, very positive. Yeah.
We had originally planned on a relatively small science-oriented event, and then more than 800 people showed up.
This day has enabled us to exchange the wealth of the information and experiences, views about forests and climate changes, and to make our collective expertise available to the delegate stakeholders, United Nations Climate Change Conference.
So the discussions revealed quite a high degree of consensus that a whole landscape approach to adaptation is necessary to have any hope of success. Thus, agriculture, forests, and land use must be considered jointly.
Starting at the first Forest Day in Bali, you have made a tremendous difference in our common fight. However, we must ensure that the lives of hundreds of millions of people who depend on forests for their very survival are not put at greater risk because of new policy.
If local users and indigenous peoples in the developing world are not recognized and assigned clear rights, RED could lead to more deforestation.
We all gain from the slowing or the reducing of the risks from deforestation. We're all responsible for the problem of the very weak starting place.
Me alegra mucho de poder acompañarlos este día en la inauguración de la 4ª edición del Día Mundial de los Bosques, una de las plataformas más influyentes y para mí más importantes en este tema. En materia de bosques y selvas es la hora de actuar y estamos actuando. Muchas gracias, bienvenidos a México.
Forest Day 4 in Cancun, the theme was Time to Act, kicked off with a great speech by President Calderon. I mean, I thought I had died and gone to heaven to have a head of state speaking passionately about the underlying drivers of deforestation.
We know the science that we have to address biodiversity, climate change, land degradation comprehensively. We know the timelines, which are very urgent. We have the tools to do it. So the motto of Forest Day is the time to act is now.
The public, as a general matter, when you ask them about forests, immediately say, oh, you know, are there enough trees left? Or even school kids will express a concern about deforestation. Now, these are all legitimate concerns, but we would like to go broader and explain that there's a positive relationship between forests and people.
This is why, despite huge difficulties to bring an inclusive climate change deal forward, progress on RED Plus was a major success of the previous conference of the parties held in Cancun, Mexico.
I have faith that the deliberations throughout the rest of the day and the conference as a whole will nurture a future for forests, for forest resources, for people, for wildlife, for Africa, and for us all. Thank you very much.
We are gathered in this room as good people with good heads and good hearts. We are gathered here with ones who are like-minded in wanting to do good things for the good world we live in.
I thank you for your perseverance. I thank you for your contributions. I thank you for the innovative thinking that you have brought to this issue, and to always be thinking at least 3 steps ahead of the negotiators who need some inspiration from all of you.
The video really shows what an amazing journey it has been, and we thank you, all of you, for your support in this success. I'd like to now welcome our Director General, Peter Holmgren, to talk about some of the highlights of today and the future of Forest Day.
Well, that video almost makes us change our mind, doesn't it? Well, we stand firm. It's been quite a day. We've been 800 people from 81 countries, and 240 of those have been UNFCCC delegates. We've reached 600,000 people through Twitter, and 800 have watched us online. So it's more than what we see in this room. And if you still missed something, the videos and the articles will be on the CIFOR website within 48 hours, it says here, I think, before that. As I said in the opening speech this morning, sorry, I should now go to, this is not as organized as this morning. Sorry about that. Today we have heard many interesting statements and results. If you remember in the opening plenary, Will Stephan talked about 9 planetary boundaries, and that only one of those are the climate. And he also said that if you're clever and if you're wise, you can build synergies that deliver the environmental system you want, and you can bring people out of poverty. We also spoke and heard from Minister Kamunto about some inspiration on boosting the number of trees on the planet. Further, one nice quote I have is from the food security session, where Deborah Bossio talked about not slash and burn, but slash and mulch. And that this is a good example where we can probably increase both forest cover and food production. Tasso Acevedo, the drivers of deforestation, gave us some updates on the positive trends in the Brazilian Amazon. And maybe soon we will talk not about the drivers of deforestation, but the drivers of the plus. We heard concerning REDD Plus more specifically that on national forest monitoring systems, Jim Penman told us that, it's not all about biometrics and reports, it's also about the communication tool, transparent and effective communication between governments and people. We heard that a broader agenda for REDD was proposed, moving beyond simply measuring greenhouse gas emissions to a much more inclusive approach, engaging multiple sectors and stakeholders. And we heard when CIFOR presented its report on REDD, carbon, biodiversity and people, mention about the multifunctional landscape management for REDD. In the session on forests on a cultivated planet, there was wide consensus that REDD is not achievable without enhanced agricultural production and improved social equity. And the challenge of food security must be addressed. And REDD, and this is interesting, is being viewed as a way to build national land use planning capacity, which could have effects also on agriculture. When it comes to landscape, there's been a lot about landscapes today, and a lot of what I've said already pertains to the landscape. But I also think that it was made clear today that we are not really there to understand exactly what we mean by a landscape or how a landscape approach would work. And I think this is good. We should not jump on a new landscape bandwagon. I think we should accept that there is still some discussions and some dialogue that needs to happen before we have a new approach, as it were. And I think Cristina Figuero's words in the video that the Forest Day, and in the future maybe Landscape Day, are 3 steps ahead of the negotiator in terms of figuring things out. And maybe that's where we are at the moment. I think those were some of the highlights from the day. There were many others. But I want now to turn to speak about coming back to the fact that Forest Day has helped to put forests on the climate change agenda. We heard that also from Tony just before. And that this mission, we can say, is almost accomplished. But the mission to deliver sustainable, climate-smart and equitable growth in the green sector has barely started. We need holistic approaches. We heard that from Tony as well. We need to tear down sector boundaries. They obscure our view and limit our set of solutions. So next year, we will have a landscape day, and we will continue to explore these topics. I look forward to that. But as I also said this morning, the Forest Day will certainly not disappear. In fact, we're already planning for a Forest Day 7, but we won't have it at the next COP. Our idea is to have Forest Days annually in developing countries, and this would allow policymakers and other stakeholders, in particular from forested countries in these regions, to attend in a more affordable way, because let's face it, these are expensive locations and expensive events. And I think we can increase the potential for capacity building this way. So stay tuned. Forest Day 7 is happening, and it will be next year. I also want to ask everyone here to consider to come back tomorrow. Tomorrow is the Agriculture, Livestock and Livelihoods Day. Same location, same stage, same issues. They will look from their end what it means to move towards a landscape day. I think that's pretty much what I would like to say at this point. And I'll save some of the final closing remarks till a little bit later. So Violetta, do you want to come back and take over the next thing? Thanks for now. I'll be back soon.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for confirming to us Forest Day supporters that Forest Day will continue the brand, but the demand is taking us elsewhere. I'd now like to welcome Jan McAlpine. She's the director of the United Nations Forum on Forests. We are very fortunate to have had Jan and the UNFF strong support through the CPF for their contributions to Forest Day at the COP. We also take this opportunity to recognize her leadership and great success in facilitating the International Year of the Forest in 2011. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much. I'll just say a few words. When I was 3 months old, my parents brought me to Africa. And I lived on this beautiful continent for 19 years. So I'm really African American, just so you understand. I was waiting for a little laugh. You guys are really tired. Jeez Louise. But in Africa, the way that you communicate is often very much through storytelling. You don't talk about theory. You bring it down to what's really happening and how it affects you. And I'm one of 6 children. Basically, our major form of entertainment was arguing, which basically set me up for my career as a negotiator. It was very good training. And I must say, my 4 brothers, and my sister are still cutting their eye teeth on me. But the International Year of Forest provided an incredible opportunity for us to highlight for the world what the role of forests can be. And we, the Collaborative Partnership on Forests, partners, the United Nations system, decided that we wanted to focus on the positive contributions. We hear so much negative. You know, you can't ignore these problems. You have to understand them. But the fact is that we really need to start to communicate the positives. We need school children not to be talking just about the incredible loss of forest every day, but we need to start to emphasize where are the good things. And there are many great stories on the ground. In the International Year of Forests, we had the first ever International Forest Film Festival, and amazing films. We also had the first ever International Forest Heroes, and I'd just like to highlight that the oldest forest hero was a gentleman from Japan who's known as Grandfather Oyster. Mr. Hatakeyama-san owned oyster beds and discovered that there was some sort of bacterial problem where the oysters, which were still edible, but were red, and therefore consumers didn't want to eat them. So he did some exploration and found out that if you planted forests up above the area of the oyster bed, it solved the problem. And then he went on to create an NGO and make changes. An amazing story. The other story I'll tell you is the youngest award winners were two young women who were 13 at the time they started this, from the United States, who set out to try to protect forests for the orangutan. They say the definition is man of the forest, but I prefer to think woman of the forest, if you don't mind. These two young women, who are still in high school, have been able to convince the Girl Scouts of America that they need to think about sourcing the palm oil used in their products from sustainably managed palm oil sources. And in fact, they just contacted me last week and said they'd had a very positive turn of events now with Girl Scouts being interested. And they've also working with Kellogg's, which makes all kinds of cereals, to get them to agree to source from sustainable sources. It's these kinds of stories, and all of us here could tell different pieces, and we've heard throughout the day these pieces. But the interconnectedness of forests with not only the ecosystem, but the people who live within it. This is why the Collaborative Partnership on Forests is so great. And I'd just like to end by saying how much I appreciate CIFOR's leadership on this. How delighted I am that, in fact, that Peter Holmgren has taken over as Director General, and I know his vision, his dedication, his leadership is going to make an enormous difference. And I can't stop without saying how much we have really enjoyed working with John Comey, who is actually sort of a communication czar as far as I'm concerned, and who has made such a difference. And in partnering with communications in the Collaborative Partnership on Forests and for the International Day of Forests, we were able to reach millions of people. And there's much more potential. So let's also look on the good side, on the glasses half full, not just half empty, because I think that's the takeaway from the International Year of Forests, and explaining it to real people. If we start talking acronym city and all this, they don't understand, they don't get the message. And Landscape Day, that's something people can grasp, and it also goes to the interconnectedness of the whole system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan, again for all your support. It is my pleasure to now welcome Tony Simons, the Director General of the World Agroforestry Center, ICRAF, who has been a big supporter of Forest Day and has organized some of the most popular sessions since Bali. As a member of the CPF, ICRAF will contribute to integrating Forest Day and Agriculture, Landscapes, and Livelihoods Day into one major event next year.
Great, thanks very much, Violetta. I had planned to walk across the stage, but without a mic, I'm grounded here, unfortunately. Peter Holmgren asked me to be a bit provocative and a bit lateral. And I'd like to apologize to everybody in advance because I can't quite read all of his writing. But here are a few reflections on Forest Day from ICRAF, one of the CPF partners. And I'd like to share with you 3 thoughts: why forests, the origins of Forest Day, and looking forward. So why forests? Forests and trees cover approximately 30% of our world. Trees are the largest, oldest, and most provisioning organisms that we have. We've lost the dinosaurs of our animal kingdom, but trees are those dinosaurs of the plant kingdom that we still have and still treasure. If you asked an architect, a builder, or a plumber to use a blueprint for a tree and produce one, they couldn't, because they are such an enigma and a wonder in the ways in which they function. Individual trees can live more than 4,500 years and are really the greatest intergenerational gift that we have. 350 million years ago, before trees came into existence, CO2 levels were 10 times what they are today, and average temperatures 10 degrees more. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for trees. So when we put trees together inside a forest, we have this beautiful assemblage that we call a forest, and that's why we're all here. So the origins of Forest Day. Well, what happens if you cross a shy Indonesian with an introverted Finnish man? Well, the answer is simple. It's called Forest Day. Because it was Daniel Mudiaso, Indonesian, and Markku Kanninen, a Finn, who first came up with the idea. And during the 26th subsidiary body meeting of UNFCCC in Bonn in May 2007, the idea was hatched. And as shy as Daniel is, he went up to Ivo de Beer during an intersessional break and asked to speak to him. And Ivo brusquely said to him, well, as he smoked a cigarette, you can have 2 minutes. And the rest is history, as they say. And when Ivo came up to Daniel in Bali and said what a great success it was, Daniel was almost tempted to say, well, you only gave me 2 minutes. Imagine if you'd given me 20. But given how shy and humble both Markku and Daniel are, coupled with the fact that English is not their first language, you can imagine how the idea could have also died inside of CIFOR. The CIFOR DG quizzing Daniel could have been something like, okay, Daniel, give me the short version of the minutes of your Bonn meeting on climate change. And Daniel's response of 2 could have been a little frustrating for Frances. Not understanding that, she could have gone along to speak to Markku and said, what does Daniel mean by 2? He said, well, that was with the number of minutes that we had to try and get the idea for us. Do you really mean for us? For CIFOR? No, for us, as in forest. And that is how Forest Day was born. We're also lucky that Frances had the name See More and not See Less. As she was able to really pick up the idea and to expand it with the CPF and with the able CIFOR communications directors of first Michael Hailu and then later John Comey to really make it happen. But of course it is the great army of CIFOR staff and volunteers that really made it happen in Bali, and then Poznan, then Copenhagen, then Cancun, then Durban, and now here in Doha. And for that, we should all be highly appreciative to CIFOR and to them. And perhaps we could show our appreciation to all of them. As mentioned this morning by both Peter Holmgren and Eduardo Rojas, the promotion, the endorsement, the support of the Collaborative Partnership on Forests has been instrumental to the impact and success of Forest Days. Where else have you seen 14 institutional champions rally around such a crucial issue? Sometimes I imagine, though, Peter, that CIFOR felt they did most of the work. And John, I don't know if there's a competition for a different acronym to CPF and what it stands for, but if it's not too late, how about CIFOR Please Fund? Or maybe Complaining Partners Frenzy. But of course, as a fellow CPF member, I say these only in jest. So looking forward to Landscape Day. And what is this thing called a landscape? Well, the term originated 1,500 years ago describe a jurisdictional area of land. And in the 16th century, Flemish painters took up the term to describe those artworks that portrayed a topographical vista. But as the Netherlands is so flat, the distance that you could see was not very far, so landscapes were quite a small concept. And Daniel, you may have even had some Dutch customers who told their painters, well, you've got 2 minutes to paint me a landscape. Recently, there's been much interest in the landscape approach, most notably at Rio +20. And yet we still pursue segregated measures to address interdependent problems of our world. In the environmental sector, we have payments for environmental services. In the forestry sector, we have RED. And now for the agriculture sector, we're proposing climate-smart agriculture. But these silos need to be amalgamated under a broader climate-smart landscape program for beneficial and productive adaptation to climate change. Moreover, it's not only the biophysical landscape that we need to address, but also the social landscape. Solutions for soil erosion, water scarcity, and low returns need to make sense across interdependent scales of farmers, district governance, and national policies. To make this happen, we need to learn from RED experiences where the opportunity cost of forest clearance alone and the market price for carbon were simplistically proposed to halt deforestation. And as Jan reminded us, we can't only look at the negative, the fact that the sky is falling on our heads. As we approach Landscape Day and landscape issues, we've got to turn it positive. Because Martin Luther King didn't wake up one morning and say, and last night, I had a nightmare. He had a dream. And the dream of CPF and the dream of the organizers of Agriculture Day are that together agriculture and forestry can be much more stronger, and that is why Landscape is being created, and that is the dream of these organizers and others. So in essence, the climate-smart landscape approach, or maybe even simply the smart landscape approach that combines people, place, and purpose, needs to be championed. The right land uses for the right people in the right place for the right reasons. And as we approach the Sustainable Development Goals, we have a multitude of perennial problems, and for these, we believe in perennial solutions. That is, trees and forests. So if you want more than a glass, plastic, concrete, and steel future for our children, let's make sure that forests and trees are well represented in landscapes. And as Luke Skywalker from the Star Wars movie may have meant to say, may the forest be with you.